who hasn't done a lot of real estate, then you'll want to probably stay for the part where I'm explaining as if you are a customer and I'm going over the contract with you. So I wanted to give you a little bit of background into me. I had my license since 2001. I've been a managing broker until I got to distinctive. So it's 6.5 years in management, I should say. I have 59 agents. I have 3 offices. I try to take a contract class every single time that it changes, and I always take it with a new instructor from somewhere around the state so that I can learn how other people do things. So over the years, I've learned how to do things from attorneys and from other leaders in the communities who have said, no, this is the way, like the car president taught the last one that I did, a former car president. So what I'm going to do is teach you what I've learned over the years to put in the blanks. And for years, I was also reading every single contract that came through pre-distinctive. I was with Coldwell Banker Heritage House, and I was the managing broker and the last stop of whether your contract got approved to, get paid on. So I'd skim them all, and I'd see problems. I'd see things that people could have done better. I'd see things that I really liked that I started putting into practice. So whatever I'm telling you today, if you've heard differently from Karen Boves, she overrules me every single time. She is our employing broker, okay? And then also, if you've heard it differently from an attorney, by all means, like, you can do it the way they have done it. So I'm not like the last stop. I've just learned over many, many years. So with that being said, I'm going to try to get through the whole thing in 90 minutes because I have a speaker coming into Coldwell at that point. So I do have to get off the call then. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Anything before we get started? Let me just make sure I have the right thing in front of me, and then I'll do screen share. Okay, so here is the new contract. So first off, and then do stop me if you have questions. If it's totally for some reason irrelevant and like just about a specific situation, I might say, let's just talk after the class, but otherwise I will answer every question as we go. Okay, I'm also gonna, I made a note to tell you if there's something that people commonly miss, I'm gonna point that out too. First off, I do wanna mention this date here. If you have a buyer who's doesn't end up signing a contract and then you look at it again the next day, and so this ends up not being the correct day, just keep updating it until the contract's locked. Same deal, you have a contract, you present it, and they want you to go and revise something, and you do a new contract that your buyer signs, and it's a different day. Always update this just so that everybody is less confused over which one was the original one and which one was the revised one, if that makes sense. Okay, let me get my reading glasses out here. Names. I'm not going to go and teach you CTME today. I use CTME, but when you have this tenants in common as in joint tenants, one of the biggest, a huge lawsuit that happened in Colorado, all happened because of a broker checking a box here and not asking the customer. They assumed, oh, they're married, they're going to want joint tenancy. Never ever assume what's going on in a person's life. There was a situation where you had a married couple, so the guy was like, well, they just want joint tenancy, right? Because if something happens to one of the people, then the other person automatically gets their estate. But you don't know if they've had kids in previous marriages, a family before they got married, or for any reason, they might not want to do joint tenancy. So the way I've handled this in the past is you almost always are talking to, if there's 2 people that are buying something, you're talking to both of them. But if something where you're only talking to one person in the transaction, just make a note in your file, get the contract signed as they asked you to do. And then sometime before closing, because you can always change this, sometime before closing, you just happen to be somewhere where you're only with the other person. You said, hey, I keep meaning to ask you, we have this thing in the file, like we have to check whether it's tenants in common or joint tenancy. Tony instructed me to do joint tenancy. Is that okay to you? Let me explain what each means in the state of Colorado. Does that make sense? So you never ever want to just trust one person in the relationship about how it should be done, because that's what happened in the lawsuit. Is the guy said, oh yeah, we're joint tenants, and then the woman dies the next year, the kids don't get the property, the shyster new husband got the property, and then it ended up being the realtor's fault, and they had to pay out to the kids who didn't get the property. So long conversation about that one line, but that is important. So here, now I'm going to tell you one other thing that I see commonly, especially in resort markets. So property, this is easy, right? Then you have the subdivision, easy enough. You either link to somebody who already has it in CTME, or you're populating it from where? iTax, usually. Well, let me show you the difference between, I just used this, I hope this is nobody's property. I just use this as an example. This is up in Engineer Village, so up near Purgatory, where you have you had a project that went through, and this was part of the entire project. That seems simple enough, right? Let's not even include the parcel number, just right here. That seems simple enough. Well, let me show you what the vesting deed says for the same property. This is the vesting deed. This whole thing, that is the property. I'm gonna go ahead and mute you guys, and then
I'll be
need to talk, that's totally okay too. Okay, so just unmute yourself if you need to go. Anyway, so you see how much information is on the vesting deed? This is the proper way to find what should go in and populate your contract to buy and sell right here. It's much better description, and it's the entire thing. A previous title commitment also could be a way to do it. And obviously, if you're connecting to somebody else's CTME, like, I'm not telling you to go in and override them or do a different contract because you don't have the whole thing. I'm just saying technically you really should use the vesting deed so that you get the entire correct legal description on there. If I ever have a TBD, like let's say this one, TBD, I always add the parcel number, because I feel like in the state of Colorado, that is like the easiest way to say, yes, it's this particular thing. Another note I wanted to make is if you ever have a property where you are selling a piece of a larger ranch. So you're gonna have a boundary adjustment, and it hasn't already had the boundary adjustment, but we're gonna buy part of it. You're gonna wanna clarify it as much as you can. If you don't have the exact, I have seen everything from, I've had a plat map, like a GIS type map, a Google map, where I've taken the entire parcel and then put let me put me on the screen so I know you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so I've like, say this is the entire parcel, and I'll put like a Sharpie and I'll put approximate acreage next to it. So maybe you know exactly how many acreage, or maybe you know it's the southwest corner, or maybe you know it's kind of part of this ranch, kind of like here, but we'll have it more described by the survey deadline. As much as you can fully describe it a little bit better makes it easier to fill in that blank. Any questions about that? Okay, legal description. Okay, I think we're good on inclusions. This is obvious, right? Just, I used to be somebody that always said, I actually want 2 remote controls that come with it. I don't care if you only have 1, I want 2, because when the person moves in, I actually have to like have one so I can open it in the middle of the night when I move to town. I've seen people put any, but then what if you don't get one? Would that be a problem? But I think you can now, these days, you can just go to Home Depot and like get them a remote control, no big deal, right? I don't know if that's the case. I haven't sold in 4 years, but just be aware that if whatever you're asking for, if you say any, you might just get none because you don't have it. So if you have these things, you check it. But here's the one, I do want to go over other inclusions. So you want to specify what you see. I am not good with taking notes when I'm on a showing. I'm on a showing. I'm not like taking notes about what the person wants to buy. So I might not realize if there's a dishwasher there. So you don't want to say all appliances. You got to like specify what appliances are there, because it never fails. Somebody's going to pull out the refrigerator and say, we really wanted it to bring to our new house. So I might not remember if something about it, but I will go back to the MLS, the description in the MLS, and I'll look through the pictures and I'll say, oh yeah, there was a dishwasher. Oh, there was a wine cooler. Okay, I'll ask for that too. So don't be afraid if you don't remember to do that, but I try to take notes when the person likes the house of what is in the property. You do want to add in use and in place. Again, I know I talk a mile a minute and that's good for a contract class. I am recording this, so if you need to go back and watch something again, that's great. But also know that, that you can stop me at any time. I just want to make sure I am recording this, right? Before I go any further, let me just check one more time.
It did say yes.
It is. Okay, cool. Because there's like 3 people that said, do not forget to do that. Okay, share. There we go. So you want to put in use and in place, because there are so many stories. I've been here 20 years and I have seen a lot of stories where people said, well, I'm not giving them the $1,500 washer that I just bought. I'm going to put a crappy one in there and replace it before closing. It happens. So put in use and in place, so it just makes it easier. it's still not right to like flip them out before closing. I've also seen people put, as we saw on the showing on this date. That's good too. That's fine. If it's furnished, here's what I learned when I worked in a resort market for a couple of, like up at the resort for 2 years. And this is how they do it up there. So if the house is furnished, like Airbnb type thing, and nothing's being removed, you say additionally, so you'd say refrigerator, oven, dishwasher, and oven, stove, as well as furnishings, including but not limited to, here's the ones you want to remember other than furniture: linens, right? Like the bed sheets, dining ware, all the stuff in the wine glasses in the kitchen, electronics, which can be really expensive if they pull the stereo out, and wall hangings, because you want all the wall hangings to go. But if it's only a couple of specific and you don't really know what you're taking, it might be like the tractor, but you don't really know, there might be some irrigation equipment, you can always say to be more fully described by seller by the DDD. So the due diligence deadline is a beautiful deadline that you can tie a lot of things to in the contract. And you can set that whenever you need it. So let's say like a week after you go under contract, the seller will give you the list of the 6 things that they're willing to give to you with the sale. You don't want to have to specify it if it's most of the stuff in the house. If it's most of the stuff in the house, you do the opposite. You say everything included except the exclusions, right? So if they're only taking the antler chandelier with them, a lot of people like the antler chandelier, they're taking that with them. So then that just becomes an exclusion. Way easier, right? So just figure out which one's easier. Is it easier to just include everything and take a few out? Okay. And then obviously they give you the list on the due diligence deadline, and then your buyer can decide whether they like the list by the objection deadline. And then there could be a resolution deadline to decide, okay, we'll throw in the antler chandelier. Is there anything on here? How about for parking and storage spaces? Make sure if it's like a condo, again, this is a lot of times when you're doing resort kind of properties, are they assigned? Are they not assigned? Do I just get to park as many vehicles as I want in the parking for the subdivision, or am I limited to just a couple, and is it assigned? Those are the things you want in here. If you have ski lockers, I see people put sheds in here. That's fine. I can't imagine somebody moving a shed off the property. I'm sure it happens. So maybe a shed would go in here, but mostly I see like ski lockers or something that's not kind of attached to the property, but it exists outside of that condo. And this has to do with condos, right? Not really a house usually, unless you want to add the shed. Leased items, I never really see anything here. Here's some different kinds of exclusions I've seen over the years. You might say it's an Airbnb, but there's a specific kind of wall hangings that the owner, it was their photo. They had this beautiful painting done from a photo that they took of the elk crossing the road, and they want to take that with them. So those are things that you can totally put under exclusions. You could say owner's personal belongings. What would that mean? So let me again use a ski condo that somebody had for years and years, and they hung all their kids' ski passes on the wall. Like they made a little decoration of it, or they have their ski passes that are like they're little locked. You know how most people that have like Airbnbs have one locked storage space that's with all their stuff? Those would be what you mean by owner's personal belongings. It doesn't mean you can take the bureau with you. It means like little things that happen to be theirs. So water rights. And if you have questions about that, just interrupt. Let's move on to water rights. If you have, it can be done on a deed. So deed means like it is on the deed. So sometimes I see where you have the deed to the property and the water rights on the deed, right? Rarely. You also could have a deed that goes alongside the deed that you get the property to. So you got the special warranty deed for the property, and then in there in the title work is another deed for the water rights. I see that not very frequently in the Durango area, La Plata County, Montezuma area. Usually it's certificates of water, like stock certificates that they sold back in the day, or some other instrument, right? But either way, if it was a deed, sometimes you don't know this. So you're kind of just putting it all in there and saying, I just need to write the offer today. I don't know the information because the listing agent didn't do a great job. But the deeded water rights are easy to find because it would be part of the title work. It would be part of if your county has what we do here, you can look up recorded documents on a property and get an idea, just like the vesting deed. Okay, so this is the only time you're going to see a bargain and sale deed. That is the proper way to transfer water rights. So if it happens to be a deed that transfers the water rights, you're going to put bargain and sale in there. not quitclaim. I used to always do quitclaim until I learned that. Other rights relating to water. This is where I have seen tons of different things. You can have deeded water rights and certificates. You can have all sorts of wacky things. You can have different ditches running through a person's property. You can have one ditch that might, I think you can have one ditch that has water rights to different ditches in it. But this is what you might say, and you might pull it right from your MLS. 1.34 CFS from the big stick ditch, and then you got 4.2 from the little gate ditch. Or you can just write TBD by the due diligence, or I guess it wouldn't be due diligence anymore because they changed it. It would be by the water rights deadline, right? You could just be to TBD, but it would have to be explained by somebody. Like you want the seller to let you know what those water rights are. Don't rely on yourself like, oh, I'm supposed to go do the research. I'm the buyer's agent. Have the seller, put it on the seller if somebody has to tell you later what that water right is, okay? So well rights, completely different. If you know the well permit, please put it in there. It doesn't hurt to take the 5 minutes to search on the Division of Water Resources website to go find if you can. Water Resources in Durango, at least, has always been super friendly, 247-1845. I call them, I memorized their number, and the people there would be like, oh, let me look. And I'm looking on GIS and going, I don't know, is that their well or is that somebody else's well? And they'll pull it up while you're on the phone. And I'm telling you, it's like 5 minutes. So if you can clarify that and it's not an MLS, go ahead and put it on. You can also write TBD. Don't put NA if there's a well. Water stock certificates. So if you have water stock certificates, somebody needs to actually have a certificate to pass to the next person at closing. So if you don't have it, that's fine. Just know that in your head. I'm not saying that you have to write anything into the offer. You just have to make sure that someone in the transaction knows that if the seller lost their certificates, sometimes it takes weeks and weeks to get a new certificate made to hand to the buyer. So that has held up closings before, just be aware. And water rights review, if you ever have water rights, just put, yeah, you have a right to look at it if you have questions about it, no big deal. So time of day deadline is new. That is not somebody recently, I saw a contract where they put like 6 a.m. or 8 a.m. because they meant when the acceptance deadline was. This is not the acceptance deadline. This is like for all of your contracts. What is that deadline? And the only thing I'd say is just don't make it 5 o'clock because yeah, you want to go home at 5 o'clock, but everybody works till 5 o'clock. They're not going to sign something by 5 o'clock. So 8 p.m. is a great time, whatever you decide in your business. Whatever you put, please do the same thing in every contract that you do as long as your buyer's okay with that, because you don't want to be confused that I did hear this from when I was taught this year. You don't want to have most of your contracts at 6 p.m. and then there was one at 9 a.m. and then there was one at 2 p.m. Try to make them all the same, or make a big note that you can put on your forehead about what that one is. Alternative earnest money deadline. The money has to be there. So if they're wiring the funds, this isn't like the day they go to the bank and get the money wired out from their account. This is the day that the money actually has to show up in the title company or the trust account where it's being held. Okay. So just have the conversation. And I'm only going to tell you what I've done badly in my life. One of them was, I didn't realize, like, when you have a Morgan Stanley or an investment account, that takes a lot more time than just going to your bank and getting the wire. So if it's coming from something funny, that it's like some investment account where they might have to sell something to get the money, just know that that can take an extra couple of days. So you've actually defaulted on the contract if your earnest money isn't there. Now, it's not that the seller probably would give you more time to get the earnest money, but you better as heck have a amendment for the date if you know that it's 3 o'clock and the money hasn't gotten there yet. You better have an amendment for that, because technically when the money arrives, it would be theirs and they can keep it because you've already defaulted on the contract. So it is really important to get that right. For all the other dates, make sure to ask your buyer whether they're going to Timbuktu and anytime during the contract period. It never fails that people just don't realize that, oh yeah, we were going to go to Africa and we're going to do this safari trip for 2 weeks, right smack in the middle of when they were going to do the inspections. People just, especially when it's like second homes, they're not always thinking like, oh, I'm going to just sit in one place and wait till this house closes, right? So just get an idea of that, and then you can structure all the dates around it. It doesn't mean they can't go away, but if they're totally not going to be somewhere where they can pick up the phone, make sure that you understand how they're going to be keeping in touch with you. Let's see. Okay, so title objection. What I've learned over the years is to line your dates up on the same day. Title, off records, and association docs are all something that the seller has to give to the buyer. So why not line them all up on the same date, right? So then when you're making a calendar for people, they're like, oh, all those things are due to us on this Tuesday. I did Tuesdays because I didn't want to do Monday. It really is hard to have a deadline on a Monday. You don't want to do anything on a Friday because then you just end up working all weekend on it. So Tuesday was always a good day that I felt like everybody's kind of settled. We can have all our, we can talk to them about it on Monday and tell them, look, this deadline's coming up tomorrow. You're going to get all your stuff by then. And then for the objections, Tuesday's a really good day to be working on stuff, right? So you have title deadline is given to you and then give them a full week to look at it. I have never sold property with this kind of market. So whatever I tell you, if you know that your market says I can't possibly give them that much time because I'll never get my offer approved, then overrule me by all means. But off record, title, and association deadlines, I've always been taught to give them a full week to object to anything that you're given, because everything on your contract, you have to imagine that you are now explaining it to a judge of why you did it that way. So imagine that you're on the stand and the buyer says, like, let's say it's the title deadline and they didn't notice there's this big thing on the title they should have gotten an attorney to look at with them, right? And they say, oh, Hosea, he didn't give us enough time. It's only 2 days and we were supposed to look at all this. How are we supposed to do all this? And Hosea is like, oh my God, yeah, I gave him 2 days in the contract, but the title came like a week before and I told them 3 times they better go to an attorney. I told them 3 times they needed to look at the contract, but unless you get that in writing and all that kind of stuff, just give them a whole week. That way it gives them tons of time that even though most people never go to an attorney before they get, through the contract, at least you have done your job to say, this is really important and you should probably get a professional to look at with you. Does that all make sense? But again, I understand like the market is something that I don't like seeing it like 1 day or 2 day. How is somebody supposed to sit down and like have a chance to talk to an attorney if they're not given a lot of time? Yes, people do go to attorneys for association docs too, to make sure that they're the condo complex that they're buying into is in good standing. Property disclosure is something I see people put way out in the contract, and I see no reason for that. I know you're all trying to be nice to the seller by saying, oh, it's like an elderly couple, and I know it's going to take them a while to get the property disclosure, but you don't want to already be through most of the inspection and then find out they didn't tell you about something that you never would have gone through with a property purchase. And now you spent all this money, right? So give them a couple days if you don't already have it signed. You probably should have it. I think best practice would be to make sure all your sellers have this done before the property goes live, right? So give them a couple days, but even if you're doing a backup contract, they should be handing you the property disclosure like immediately. So a couple days if you're trying to be nice, not a long time. Lead-based paint, same deal. So lead-based paint, a little different. So nobody really, usually people don't go and get lead paint testing done, but this is, the property disclosure is for you to get the disclosure, right? Your buyer needs to get the disclosure by then. They're not approving it by signing it. They're just saying, I got it, right? Lead-based paint is a little different because you have to like check a box, whether you want to get it tested, and then you got to sign. Everyone has to sign it by this date. So it used to be, it had to be signed by the date that you go under contract. Now they're actually giving you, you can make your own date. Don't put it out too long, but this would be the date that every single person, the listing agent, buyer's agent, and seller and buyer all have to have that signed. So make sure you can actually perform that. So loan has changed this year. And I know you've probably talked about this with your respective offices. I know in Durango, we've talked about it again and again, but loan app is the same. That is the date that, let's say the market changes and your person has tons of time to look around to decide who they're going to use for their loan. And they kind of have an idea, but they might want to do this kind of loan and they're not really sure yet. We're not in that market now. You better have looked at a lender and like figured all that out beforehand. But this is the date that you would have to shop around and say, I might go with any of these 5 banks. So I need to get my applications in with every single one of those banks by that deadline. Doesn't mean you have to pick the bank by then. You better pick the bank by then, but let's just say, like, technically you don't have to pick the bank by then. You just have to have your applications in, and no one ever needs proof until you don't get the loan and you try to get out of the offer or try to get out of the contract, and you put together the termination, and a savvy buyer's agent or seller's agent will say, well, show me proof that you got your application in on time. And I know of a story, who knows if it's true, but it became, this woman became a hero to me. She's over at our local KW office. She's 25 years ago. She kept somebody's, I think it was like $12,000 worth of earnest money because she asked that question. They had said it was because of loan they didn't get, and then they never had gotten their loan apps in on time and they couldn't show proof. And she was able to keep that earnest money for her seller. So just be aware that actually matters. So if they decide on this bank and then like 3 days after the application deadline, they decided they want to go with this bank instead, and they didn't have their application, and just be aware, all those things, you do need to change the date to stay in compliance and stay, you know, that you, what would you call it? Default. You're not defaulting on the contract. Loan terms. So the loan terms is the thing that comes to the buyer. It's like the buyer disclosure. So by law, it has to go to your buyer within 3 business days of them handing in their application. Okay, so that makes sense. They hand in their applications, 3 days later, poof, they get a truth in lending disclosure and all those disclosures that come. So what day do I put under loan terms? I would suggest, and this is what I learned in my classes, was 5 business days. So it gives the, oh, I screwed up and I got it to you, but I got it to you at 9 at night. So yes, it was 3 days, but I didn't see it till the 4th day. And then it gives 1 extra day for that buyer to sleep on it and say, oh, do I really want to do it? So this is the only out for whether you're okay with the terms of the loan. Makes it so much easier instead of waiting till the last minute to say, you know, I don't like my interest rate. I'm going to get my earnest money back 5 days before closing. This is for all the kind of loan terms that you're looking at. So all you get an out for on 519 is, did you get the loan? So totally quantifiable, not something you can just say, I don't like it. The seller's agent could say, did you get the loan, lender? They just tried to get out of the contract. Did they or did they not get the loan? So that is the only way you get out. So this date should go 5 business days. So 1 week after. See how I lined it up on a Tuesday. This date, did they get the loan? I would put no earlier, if you're able to in this market, 5 business days before closing. Okay. I don't remember where I heard this, but one lender had told me that, no, we always run the person's credit 5 business days before closing. So that's really, you know, if you did it 6 days before closing and then your credit had changed because your buyer went out and bought a car, technically, what if they didn't get the loan on the 5th day and you just gave away your loan rate? So I tried to do this 5 business days before closing, but again, I don't know what your what the market determines. All of these are not applicable, as most of you know, unless you're doing seller financing. Okay. Appraisal. So these line up 1 week before your loan is due. I try to get that as far out as possible. ILC. How would you folks know? Somebody get off mute and tell me, how would you know when your survey deadlines should be and when your inspection deadlines should be in a contract? Take a guess. How would you set that up?
Calls. I would make some calls to see what.
You have to make a call. So don't put it in such a rookie move and so embarrassing when you get a contract signed and then like the next day you have to call the agent and say, I know there were 10 competing offers and we got the property, but I have to do a new inspection date because I can't find an inspector. So make your calls. Just, I always would like, I knew the text, the phone numbers for all my favorite, I shouldn't say my favorite, but the people that I thought did a good job, the inspectors, I text 3 of them. And then you might just have an idea of how far out the surveyors are, make a bunch of calls and see if anybody can do an ILC if you think you need one. And then you put the dates in the contract. That way, when you have it up and you're trying to explain your contract because there's 10 other offers and you go, I'm so sorry, this survey deadline is so far out, but I called and the only person that can do it in the next month and a half is so-and-so, and he was the earliest. So I put it in there. Makes you look a little more savvy. So yeah, don't just go putting things in and going, you know, willy-nilly, because things change from week to week. Are there a lot of refis going on? Or are there not a lot of refis going on? Water rights examination, give them enough time to just take it to an attorney if they want to go talk to somebody about it, and to make sure that you know what the water rights are. So maybe that's a couple weeks. That's just up to the contract. And inspection termination again. So the thing that changed, and it's confounding everybody who's had their license for a while, inspection termination and objection, same date. I don't care where you put them, but they have to be the same date, because the language in the contract tells you that you either terminate or you object, one or the other, okay? So they have to be the same date. And then the resolution can be a few days later. And I hate having this on a Friday, because then you're gonna be working on the resolution all weekend. So I like, figure it out from when you do your inspection, and also figure out, like, if it's a rough house and you have the ability, let's say the market's a little bit different in 6 months, and it's a real fixer-upper, and it's like, it's not enough to have the inspection done by the inspection deadline. You'd love to have just a couple contractors come and give you some idea of what it's gonna, some bids, right? So you decide whether it's better to just get the inspection done early and ask them to fix it, or do you want to get a couple bids so you know what you're dealing with? It might be the difference between asking the seller to give you 5,000 versus 4,100. It makes the deal go through a lot easier. So just be aware of that, and I can talk about that in another class, kind of the positives and negatives.
With the water rights examination deadline, when do you get the water rights to start reviewing? Because the examination deadline is to object or question it, right?
If I had it when I went under contract, I'd say, like, there's in my area, in our area, there's one person that does great job at water rights. So attorney. So I'd want to make sure, if I got it with my contract, I might call her and say, hey, Janice or Cheftel, whatever it is, when could you look at this if we got it to you right away? And then go by hers. Any other time, I think water rights, like if you're dealing with, oh my God, I could name like 5 agents on my hand that will take weeks to get you that water information. So it's all about, how long do you think it would take you to get me the information so I can actually review it? And so let's say it's going to take them a week and a half. You say, hey, listing agent, I put on here the water rights deadline for 3 weeks from today, but that's only because I'm expecting it's going to take you a while to find that stuff. And they go, oh, it won't take me that long. Then put it for 2 weeks from that day. And then you can always get an extension, hopefully, to get it done. It's all about them giving you the information, though. You have
so there's no deadline in the dates and deadlines for them to give you the water.
I don't think so. But let's see here. You could always write that in. Okay, wait, let's go up to water rights. I think it was up above. Sorry to make you dizzy. Water rights review. They do, if the water rights are before the deadline, but it doesn't say the date. So I think that what I would do is just add down in the additional provisions per paragraph 2.7.6, buyer shall or seller shall supply proof of all existing water rights by, and you make a date. And anytime you add a deadline, it's got to go here. That's why there's lines here. So here would be that 2.7 paragraph, and here it would be like water rights to be provided to buyer, and then you put a deadline. So it matches what you write in additional provisions. Okay. So yes, you do have to add that, and that's a great question. I used to add it to a due diligence deadline, but you're usually using due diligence deadline for like septic and everything else, so I wouldn't tie them to the same day. Great question. Anything else? Okay, hold on. Appraisal, water rights, ILC. Yep, this is all about how long it's going to take you to do it. Property inspection resolution, give it a few days so that both parties can go back and forth. Property insurance, I never have this any later than the inspection deadline, because it's not that big of a deal. You call a bunch, well, usually you call, if it's in the middle of a fire season, it might be a big deal. You call State Farm, you call farmers, you call a few places, make sure you're comfortable with the price that they're giving you for insuring the house. It's the best if you actually have a binder by the date you put in here. The buyer wants a binder by this date, but most companies are going to say, well, we really don't give binders until closing. So you just have to have a comfort level with it. And if it's a weird build like straw bale or I don't know, tiny home or something that's not usual, you might have to be super aware that's something they have to do right away. And you want to keep following up with them to make sure they're doing it. It's not that big of a deal, but it's an out in the contract, so you might as well just get it done right away. So always inspection deadline or before. Due diligence, only put it in if you have something. I hate seeing deadlines in here and you're like, you didn't ask for anything. Why did you put a deadline in there? Like, just follow through. Lead-based paint, again, that's up to you, whether they want to look into it. If they've got kids or they're planning on having kids, be very aware that that could be a problem. Closing date, whatever, I have no idea. You guys know better than me when closings are now. Is it 45 days? Is it 30? I doubt anybody can get anything done in 30 with surveys and lenders. Possession day, this is a good idea. I learned day of closing, time of closing. That way, if you're ever moving the closing a different day, then you don't have to remember and have this a different, like, then you never have to change these if you're changing the closing date. If you put 5/26 down here, then you're going to have to remember if you ever amend this date, you got to amend this date. Does that make sense? It all just kind of goes with it. And then acceptance deadline. There's so many tricks with that. Do you give them the night to think about it? You're never going to push someone's hand. So if there's 10 competing offers and you go, well, they said they're going to review them at 6 o'clock tomorrow. I'm going to make my deadline at 5 o'clock. They better get back to me first because I put it in first. Like, they're not going to get back to you. So just give them plenty of time to look at it. And it's not going to, if they have another showing, you got this $2 million house, you want to get it wrapped up at 5 o'clock today, and there's a showing at 9 a.m. You could try to do that if it's a high luxury kind of property, but most of the time they are not signing your offer. They're assuming your offer is going to be good at 9 a.m. when that other offer comes in, right? So you're probably not going to push someone's hand that way. Anything else? 5 p.m. Deadlines. And I've never, ever tried to get someone to sign something on the same day. The buyer and seller never get to meet each other. So everything you write in your offer is something that they're going to judge you by. Like the seller's going to be like, dude, what do they mean? They really think I've lived here 30 years. They really think I'm going to make a decision in 2 hours. So just be aware of how it could be read to other people. Okay. Is there anything I have to explain here? Nope. There is this one thing. Do you see this? So if you are doing an FHA or VA loan, it does not matter what you put in the appraisal deadlines. FHA and VA can take as long as they want to get it done. So just be aware. I'll probably never teach that again. Computation of period of days. I always said the date is the date is the date, and I made sure it wasn't on a holiday until I forgot one day. So usually people put will. Just know if it's a holiday, it just extends it to the next day. Not talk about purchase price. Seller concessions, we used to use those all of the time in a bad market to help pay for closing costs. I have just never seen that in years. Earnest money. Nothing I really need to say about that. Just put the place that it's going to be sitting. Okay. This is a box I never ever check until you actually talk to the person. So I can go over what you say to the person. You just want, this is like, are the funds sitting in a bank account that you can transfer today? Or is it tied up in a loan? It's tied up in a house. It's tied up in something. It's tied up in Morgan Stanley. You have a statement that you can do it today. It's not cash. It's not sitting there. So this is whether or not this money right here, cash at closing, is sitting in your bank account ready to be transferred, or whether mom has to give it to you or someone else something has to happen. So always ask them, never fill in that blank. So when I'm going over an offer with someone, I have a little check sheet, and I'll have like the 6 things that I had to come back to and make sure I fill in. Loan limitations. This is pretty obvious. It is totally okay to check if you aren't sure how you're going to get the property, especially for like a bigger property. You might not know, like, we're probably going to pay cash, but I want the right to look into the loans. You can just start check happy. If they're a vet, you definitely want to check VA because they have some great programs. If you're checking other, can you explain what that is? Like, don't just check other and think nobody's going to catch it. The agent's going to go, well, what do they mean other? One example of that would be a HELOC, like a home equity line of credit off of another property. I see that all the time. The amount that goes in this blank, if somebody's done a VA or FHA recently, let me know. It used to be $75 for years and years and years. So I have no idea. There's just one little thing that the buyer is not allowed to pay for if they're getting an FHA or VA loan. I don't think it's the case anymore on VA, but whatever. I put 150 and it's not more than that. It's not like a big amount of money. So all of these guys, you can just check the box next to them and admit. It makes your offer so much simpler. Do not get check happy all the time. I catch it like a couple times every year. Someone would get check happy. So in CTME, you can check that box because they're not doing assumption. They're not doing, and then they go down here and check that box. So then they just deleted their entire loan paragraph and they can't get out of the contract based on loan, and they'll never notice it. So twice a year, I'd like be like, oh, so-and-so, you know, you don't have a loan deadline. What do you mean? You're like, you check the box, you got it out. So don't check the box. This is all, as we call it, boilerplate, right? So FHA, what do you put in here? If you have an FHA loan, what goes in here is the words purchase price, okay? Because then if you have a counter offer, let's say you offer $100,000 for a property and you put, it has to appraise for 100,000, right? And then they come back with 120,000 as the counter offer, but you forgot to check this, you forgot to change this on the counter offer, then the property would only have to appraise for 100, right? So just put purchase price there. I've never seen the cost of the appraisal be anything but the buyers. So that's what you put in there. This is all boilerplate. I've never, in our area, it's customary and normal for the seller to pay this. OEC, this is new this year. Well, OEC, no, it was something down below that was new. This part wasn't new, sorry. OEC, if you're gonna do something that's like super expensive development land or something in a weird place, there are places in Colorado that you can't get OEC for that property. It doesn't hurt to just call the title company. If you have something wacky, say, hey, I just wanted to check if you have OEC or if you can get OEC on this property before you check the box. And then what they'll let you do is you can either do it with an ILC on file, and it has to be like within a certain amount of years, right? Or if it was the other, like I said, it was a weird property and they just don't want to give you OEC, it might be like an $8,000 Alta survey. So just make sure if it's something really wacky that you call and make sure they can get OEC first. I'd say 99% of houses or 95% of houses, you're not going to have a problem with that. This was always a seller cost. I've seen some people lately do 1/2 and 1/2 just to try to like make their offer a little better. Again, this is all boilerplate. Oh, this is the part that was new. So tax certificate was always paid by the seller in our area. So just mark seller. I mean, it's not that expensive. If you want the buyer to pay for it, it's not a big deal, but that's what I put there. And a trick is if you're going through a contract and you don't want to forget anything, tab through it. The tab will always get you to the next blank. If you're newer at doing this, you are going to forget some blank in the contract. There's so many of them, okay? So mineral rights review, obviously, if there's mineral rights, if there's no mineral rights, which there aren't almost everywhere, just put does not. If there's no mineral rights, there's nothing to review, so just put do not. So here's the kind of things you can put in the ILC thing. If you want an ILC, get that. Remember, I'll teach a whole class about ILCs. They are not surveys. That's why there's a different box here. A new survey might be a boundary survey, and it might be an improvement survey plat. Those are the two that I see there. Do you just want the square drawn, or do you want the square with a square of the house and a square of the shed and where the easements are and all those kind of things? That's what the difference is, those. And then this is what I've seen a lot, and this makes a lot of sense. So sometimes the lender makes you get an ILC, and sometimes the title company does. So doesn't it make sense that the title, oh, I spelled tile, title company will pay if it's a seller, if the title company is making you do an ILC, it makes sense that it would be a seller cost. If the lender is making you do it, it makes sense that it's a buyer cost. So in a normal market, that's what I used to see. Delivery of ILC, this, you always write buyer's attorney if any. Isn't that awesome? It's another way that you are reminding the buyer they should get an attorney. Okay, so easy to do. Of course, you want the agents to get a copy. You're going to get a copy. You don't have to write yourself in. They're going to give you a copy. So yeah, just write buyer's attorney if any. Occupancy agreement, that's easy. Obviously, if you have a lease that's going to go to the next person, then you want to get a copy of that. Okay, so this is new. Leased items, documents. Just put will not for these. And this is what I got taught in the class was, if you had leases, if you had like encumbered inclusions, like I don't care. I don't want my buyer to deal with it. So I'm just putting does not. And then if they want to come back and say, well, we do have these solar panels or we do have this, that's up to them later, but just put does not unless you know of something. Other documents and information. So this is where you put, so let's say I'm going to use a local example. So due diligence, what kind of things go there? We'll talk about septic in a minute. What about, you were reading the MLS and it said, we know there's a foundation issue. We had an engineer look at it and there's no problem. So here you'd write engineer report as mentioned in MLS. If they had another kind of report, soil report, something that you know they have that has already been mentioned, this isn't a time for you to think of what kind of things might have been wrong with the house. Like if they didn't disclose it, you'll find out later and then you can ask for something at that time. I've seen some people put in here any previous inspection reports, in possession. Make sure you put in possession of seller, because some sellers get rid of that stuff. Some sellers keep everything. So you could ask for any kind of radon reports they have on file, any warranties they have on file to look at, but make sure that you ask for, if you want something, you have to actually spell it out and then put a deadline in here. Here's another example. So the local example is septic. You want a whole bunch of stuff done on the septic because we have to transfer it at closing. So you need the paperwork started. You need to get the septic looked at. And so instead of just tying it to inspection, there was one part of it, the clause ties it to the due diligence deadline. You've got to give us something by the due diligence deadline. So there's a clause, right? Clauses go all the way in additional provisions. But if you're adding something in the additional provisions that has to do with a different part of the contract, you want to put it there too. So let's say you shove this big septic clause in additional provisions, but other documents, it's no longer NA. It's whatever you just asked for there. So let's say it said, we need the report from the septic engineer. Then you're all by the due diligence deadline. So you put a due diligence deadline up in the dates and deadlines section. Okay. Then in this part, you put certificate by septic engineer, see paragraph 30. And then you're asking for it down there. So it all ties together. Okay. I just don't want anything that you're standing in court and the other person's attorney trying to prove that you're incompetent. That's what they're always trying to prove. Oh, the agent was incompetent. And it's so embarrassing. Like I know agents that have had to go through that. They're the most competent person in the world, but they're trying to get your money. They're trying to get your insurance money. So they're trying to prove any way that you didn't do your job. So just make sure everything just ties together really well. So it makes you look like you covered every single base. It doesn't mean that if you left this NA, it's not going to work. It probably will. Just try to make your contracts as perfect as possible. I'm going to bring Todd Seeger. He's a top agent in our office. When you read his language in his contracts, I just read some last night and I was like, this is exactly like what you should strive to be at. Like every little period, every little blank is filled. The NAs are, everything's tied together. There's a reason like you want to be that way so that you prove like how it's a show of being professional out there to agents and other offices and your own agents. So sorry about that. Conditional on sale. So you put the address in here. This is spelled out very well in the contract now, conditional upon sale of property. So you don't have to add much more than the address. And then in additional provisions, you might add a few sentences, but it's really well done, which it wasn't before. Source of potable water. So make sure you check all these boxes again. If you did or didn't get the property disclosure, put that there's no well and put that you do not acknowledge a receipt of the current well permit, okay? So even if you mark this one, it's just keep marking boxes. Okay, closing instructions are not executed with this contract. And nobody does that anymore, as far as I understand. Closing, I used to write buyer and seller by mutual agreement because it sounded all nice. You don't really use this anymore because it doesn't matter when you close. Like the buyer's going to close and then the seller's going to close. They're not closing together usually. So I've seen all sorts of stuff, but I always thought that sounded nice. I had heard it somewhere else and I thought it sounded nice. So that's what I used to always do. Make the seller think nice things about us. Transfer of title, from what I understand, the market has really changed and we used to only see general warranty deeds in our area. I'm starting to only see special warranty deeds. We have such a hot market. I can't imagine you're going to want to do something like asking for a general warranty deed in a market where most people are asking for something else, but that's up to your buyer. You can say, if you're checking this box, you explain the difference between the two deeds, which I can go into later. But you would say, you're competing offers and we're in a hot market. And it would be pretty abnormal it's normal, and don't tell them they're abnormal. Tell them it's normal and customary. I use that all the time. It's normal and customary for us to see special warranty deeds in our market. Okay. Used to be like kind of half and half, but it's really changed. You guys are letting me fly through this. This is awesome. Closing services fees. So this is how I used to feel about all these fees. You gotta tab through these. Make sure you don't miss one. People always miss something and it's going to cost you. You're the one that's going to end up having to pay for it. Closing services fee always seems to be half and half. That's not for the loan. Your buyer's going to pay for all their loan closing fees, and then the closing fee is that like $350, $400 to have the closing at the title company. And I've always seen that split half and half, although in this market, maybe it's a buyer cost, who knows? Ask someone who's actually selling, but I think it's probably one half and half still. So here's what I think about all this stuff. If you were buying a brand new house, a brand new subdivision house that's not been lived in before, there's going to be working capital. And I think that's always a buyer cost, right? I've never seen it anywhere else. If you're buying something that has an assessment on it, like say something that's been around for 10, 20 years and the HOA has an assessment on it, that's totally different, okay? So if this is the only time I check buyer is if it's a brand new house and you have to pay the working capital or the reserve fee. If it's an existing house, I sure would not be checking that the buyer wants to take on the assessments, because you might have had some big $8,000 assessment, right? So if I was not buying a brand new house, how I used to fill this out was that all of these were paid by the seller. Okay, maybe the utility transfer fee, that's a new one. I guess the buyer would pay that. And here's my thought on it. It is not my job as a buyer's agent to know exactly what all the fees are in the subdivision. I feel like I'm not going to ask my buyer to be paying all these fees because I can't tell them what they are before we go under contract. It's kind of like scary, right? Put it all on the seller. They pay all those fees. Most of them are nominal, right? And then when my person goes around to sell, then they probably have to pay all those fees. So that's how I've always explained it to my buyer is, look, a lot of these are just little, we have a group called AREM that manages these HOAs, and they'll say, oh, it's $300 for each thing that we have to change. So you might have a subdivision within a subdivision that you're paying $300 for this, $300 for this. And then, oh, there's a metro that has to be changed too. And so all of a sudden it tacks on another like $1,000 to my buyer. So I used to always go through and do that. But you might want to check to see what other people do in your office to make sure that I'm not leading you astray, because we are in a hot market and it's just different than it used to be. But again, that's scary to just be saying you're going to pay for it. So what are some of those things? Here's another one. Don't think that you're smarter than the contract. So I got in a really big pickle once in this place called Edgemont Highlands. It was Copperhead Camp in Edgemont Highlands. And I had sold so many houses there before, and I had been 12 years in the business, that I thought, well, there's no status letter fee, but there is this, there's this other fee. There's this fee, but there isn't this fee. So I was checking not applicable on some of these things. Like I ended up paying out of my pocket. My seller was mad at me because she's like, why did you check the not applicable? I'm like, well, I thought it was called this. Every HOA calls things a different thing. They might call it a status letter fee. I know with I'm on a board of one of them, and I'm the person that has to decide, like, what does this person have to pay at closing? We call it something that's not on this contract. It's not called a status letter fee. It's called like a transfer fee or something, right? So that's why I feel like if you know you're in a subdivision where there's an HOA, just make sure you don't put not applicable, because you don't know. It's not your problem. Just put it out, okay? So now let us get into these. These could be HOA, other fees. I have no idea what other fees would mean. That's new. Local transfer tax. We don't have one in La Plata County, Montezuma County, San Juan County. No idea about Montrose. This is like Telluride has one. I don't think very many other places. Sales and use tax comes up in a couple different ways. It would come up if you're buying furniture, like stuff that's not attached. It comes up when you're buying irrigation equipment. So think huge pipes and stuff that's out there. And for some reason, I think it comes up when you have I was told by an attorney that you have a rental, your person's moving in and they're buying this house. But it used to be a property management and an Airbnb. I think you should check the box anyway, because I feel like there's something that you want to make sure the seller takes care of. Any last taxes with the county on this house. I think that's what I've learned. So just check that the seller pays that if there's any of these things. But, you know, sales and use tax, if the buyer's buying furniture, it might make sense that it would be a buyer's cost. I kind of feel like that might be a buyer's cost unless it's something that the seller did that you're not taking on. Private transfer fee, again, that has to do with like metros and things like this. Water transfer fee, this is totally okay to put TBD because it's not your job to have to figure this out before you want to write an offer. I do not know what things are called. If you have like Edgemont versus like, there's things that are water districts, there's things that are companies, it's all different. I just start checking boxes. It doesn't matter. Like, just make sure you check all the boxes. Water district would be like water out of your faucet. If it's irrigation, just start checking these things because you don't know if there's an augmentation membership. You don't know if it ends up being a water stock certificate. And if you know what irrigation ditch it is, or what company it is, you can write it in here too. So you could do check, this is irrigation, check, and then put PRID. That's one of our water, Pine River Irrigation District. You're marking all the boxes and you're putting in here, I want it done. You could put Forest Lakes Metro, you could put whatever company it is, whatever just put it all in here, and it's okay to put TBD, and someone will figure it out before closing, probably like a week before closing. And then it's up to you, whoever you want. Like in this market, I'm probably putting the buyer's going to pay all this stuff. But if it's, we have some companies that are, I think $1,100 to transfer. I think it's PRID. It's one of those, oh no, it's Florida Mesa. Super expensive to transfer it. We just had an email going around our office that said it was just increased too. So do not forget that if there's irrigation, you could have a very hefty fee, and make sure somebody's paying for it. Maybe it makes sense for both buyer and seller to pay that. Utility transfer fees, I don't know. Has anybody come across one? That's new this year, but I don't know what a utility transfer fee was. I guess if you were taking over propane, they might have some sort of fee. FERPTA, let's just skip this. It's supposed to be your on you, whether whether the seller is foreign or not. So God, that's caused a lot of trouble lately. But I just wouldn't go there. I don't know. I wouldn't even really bring it up, but I kind of made a joke about it with my buyers, is saying, or do you know whether we have a seller who happens to live in a different country? Like, there's no other way to kind of talk about that. But I can tell you the details someday if you want. Okay, so this is generally the best way to figure out taxes, is the most recent mill levy and the most recent assessed valuation, okay? Because if you do it this way, and then the taxes just went up, then you're not getting much money back at closing if it went up. I've also seen people, if the last time it was valuated was land and they just built a $2 million house on it, and you're buying the $2 million house to get it. Like, so it was assessed as land as $50,000 lot. You're now buying a $2 million house, but you're only getting like $100 of the tax like proration, right? So I've seen very savvy agents say, we want the valuation based on the neighbor's house at 575 Scotch Creek Drive. Does that make sense? So they're saying, we actually want more money. So why don't you look at that guy down the street? Because he's got a house that's kind of similar to the one we're buying, prorated on that. So savvy buyers agents will do that if you have a situation like that. The only other reason that it gets really messed up is we have a, what is it called? In Colorado, there's this like seniors, it's not an exemption, but like seniors can get taxes really cheap if they can prove that they've lived in the house for a certain amount of time. Be aware, if you go on iTax and you say, oh, they only have to pay $50 a year, it could be because they either have a homestead exemption, or they are of a certain age where they got like some sort of, I don't know if it's like a low income thing or if it has to do with age only. But if that is the case, you might want to write something in the contract that says you want a little bit more money at closing. Because my buyers get mad when they get like $25 back at closing, and then they have to pay like $2,000 the next year. If you have a rental, okay, so that's it on taxes. If you have a rental, it's always rents actually received. I've never seen accrued. Okay, other prorations, propane's already in here. You don't have to mention propane, but propane rental costs might be a few $100. If you have like a nice house and they have a guy that comes and plows once a week in the winter and it's the middle of winter, you might want to prorate the guy, the maintenance person that comes. Could be like a gardener or anybody that you want to keep on to be a house keeper or house like doing things for you, could be in this part. So plowing could be one, but you generally, the only thing you have prorations are property. Don't put HOA. HOA's up. it makes you, it just makes you look like you don't know what you're doing because the HOA is already in here somewhere else in the contract. You don't have to address that again. Association assessments, I always put seller because I feel like this, when I'm explaining it to the buyer, I say, look, we don't know if there's an assessment on the property. They didn't disclose anything, but let's just put seller and they have to take care of it before closing. And then I write in here, no special assessments, because I'm telling them that you told us there was no special assessment on the HOA. So by signing this, Mr. Seller, you know, you were telling us that you're like signing again that there's no special assessments and you don't have to worry about it. This, I also got caught once. I used to always put $250 a day or $100 a day, whatever it was. I kind of made something up. And I said, if you don't get out of the house, it's $100 a day. Well, I had a time once that they didn't get out on time. Well, guess what? I had a dog and a cat that were in a shelter or whatever you call it, like at the vet's overnight. So how much does that cost? Because they couldn't get in their house and they were expecting to move right in. They had to get a hotel. They had the moving truck was supposed to be there. So these are the questions that you ask your buyer. If the day of closing, the seller happens to not get out of the house and you are not in a position where you can extend closing because you have a rate lock or your money is there and you got to close for your loan, what is it worth it to you to ask them for money back? So that is up to them. And obviously you want to make sure you don't check, you know what to do there. And then this one, I mean, obviously it's nice. They have a little check mark if you're doing post occupancy. So I'm going to rush through this. Never, ever. I have never seen that. I saw it once and I told the guy he's not going to work for me if he, if he gets it signed. I said, you're not doing specific performance. Nobody does that. Okay. Electronic notice. I've always been taught that you don't have to put CTME in this line, that email is electronic notice for CTME. Yes, the electronic signature goes through email, so you don't have to put that in here, but you do what you want to do there. It's not that big of a deal. Here's some additional provisions that I think you should always have in your contracts if it's applicable. If there's a septic, you need a septic clause in La Plata County. If always mention cleaning. So what I do in my contracts is I take a very general clause that's in our clause library and it says like, all carpets shall be vacuumed, floors swept and mopped kind of thing. And I say, is this good enough? And then they'll tell me, the buyer will tell me what they want. I don't put it in there for them. I say, well, like, think about, do you want it professionally cleaned? Do you want the seller to just go rent like a carpet cleaner at Walmart or something? Do you want the walls cleaned? Like, do you want the windows cleaned? Like, it's up to them to tell you. And I have had in luxury homes, I had one time that I ended up coming out of pocket because the buyer was so mad because they took a bunch of stuff off the walls and it left big holes in the wall. I never sold like really nice houses before, and I didn't realize like that was a thing, like that you have a big wall hanging, it's going to make a mark. So do you want them to go around and repaint it with exactly the same paint as before? So specify what you're looking for and just try to think of all the things you've seen before in a contract. Like, do you want it professionally clean? Do you want this? Do you want it? Don't just, and also never put professionally clean because that means a lot of things to a lot of people. Do you want them to go through the drawers and clean out the drawers? Do you want them to make sure they get the bathrooms, like including but not limited to, and just expand on anything that's important to them? Funds, day of closing. If you have a loan, always add that clause. And if you don't have it for some reason, ask me. There's one that saved more butts than anything else. It's like, if you have a loan and the lender doesn't come through on the day of closing, the money's not there, we're tabletop closing. So if buyer and seller close at 9 a.m. and your money's not there by 9 a.m. or by the end of the day, then you're considered in default and they could keep your earnest money and close with the person who just wrote the backup offer for a lot more, right? So and that's happened so many times. So in this market, and the buyer's agent is freaking out because they did nothing wrong. The lender said it would be there. It's not there. So if you have this little clause in here that says you have until 2 p.m. the next day, like, oh, you can actually go to bed at night and not cry. So what else? So what I've always done in my contracts, this might be excessive, but I am just get very nervous with contracts and wanting to make sure I'm doing them right. I go through all the clauses and I collect my own. Over the years, you'll find ones that you like from contracts. You're not really supposed to do that, but just kind of keep an eye on, look at all the clauses and just skim them real fast. Probably takes you like 5 minutes, right? And go, oh shoot, survey, I forgot to do that. So it'll remind you once in a while of something that you hadn't thought of that probably should be in there. And then this is what they mean here. So yeah, post occupancy, that's obvious. So if you're emailing anything at the same time, that's not a part of the contract, but you wanted to mention that you did have, like you signed the property disclosure, you signed the square footage disclosure, you're showing them your lender letter. Those all would be right there. And then do make sure you fill this out so you do get paid. Not that they're not going to pay you, but you still just make sure you get that all signed. Any questions on that before I do a quick run through? You guys are amazing just listening to me. So Guida, you've had so much experience with contracts. If you want to bow out, Janice, I'm not sure, or Janice, I'm sorry. If you feel like you don't need me to run through it, then I'm totally okay with you skipping off the Zoom meeting. But I was going to run through it. I have 25 minutes. That should be enough. I used to always go through the contract line by line with people because I want them to feel comfortable signing, and I want to know what they're signing. I sold for, I guess it would be 15 years before I only went into management. And one of my last contracts I did, I messed up. It was the only time I didn't go through the whole contract. I had a super type A personality, super uber rich. He had like 4 different houses, and he's looking at me. He's like, where do I sign? I don't want to go through this. I'm like, please, let me just go. So I started going through the first page. I'm like, oh, well, you've done this before. I've bought so many houses. Well, guess what? He never bought one in Colorado. So we're like a week into the contract. And he says, well, you didn't tell me that. So I tried to, but I did get in, I did end up pants down in something that happened that I hadn't explained. So there has to be some way that you have to get through to them. That's really important for you to go through line by line. And if you do it once for someone and then they sign it and you don't get the house, you don't have to go through it the next time as much. You're just showing them what you put in there and telling them nothing changed from our last offer, except this is a different house. So let me show you a few things, but you only have to do it once, but you really want to make sure that they understand. So the first thing out of your mouth, always, never, ever forget this. The first thing out of your mouth, it is right here. So you can't forget. If you want to like highlight it, that's fine, is that you should get an attorney. Before you sign this, if you think you want an attorney to advise you on something, the time is before you go under contract, because otherwise you're going to bring it to, if your accountant might have some say in whether you should get that third house and pay cash versus a loan kind of thing, and you need to make the decision now, you don't want to do it while you're under contract. The attorney would be like, well, I wish you hadn't signed that. What did your agent tell you? Yeah, it just, at least tell them that. Say, most people don't end up doing it, but I do want to say that it's really important, and this is a legal document, okay? So, and I'm so rusty, I haven't done this in like a year and a half, so let's see. So, who wants to be my buyer? Who's gonna be my buyer today? Tony, can I use you? I can see you.
Sure.
Okay, Tony, okay, so we're gonna go over this, and maybe you're with your partner. Oh wait, where'd you go? Did I just lose you? Hold on. There you are. Okay. So you're sitting with your partner, and we're both in the up at Coldwell, and I used to always do this in person, and I could explain it while it's upside down, that kind of thing. So I guess Zoom is the way most people probably present offers now. But okay, so I wrote both of your names in up here. Is that exactly how you want do you want your middle initial? Do you want this? What do you think, Tony? Does that look good?
Looks great.
Okay, so there's 2 different ways that you can own property in the state of Colorado. One is called joint tenancy, and one is called tenants in common. So with joint tenancy, if something was to happen to one of you, the other person gets the entire estate to themselves. And in tenants in common, it would go and be decided among your heirs according to your will. Which one would you like it to be?
Let's do tenants in common.
Okay, that okay with both of you? Okay, so that's exactly how I do it. I just look at them both. They both decide. That's it. So, oh, I didn't mention this before. So if you think that, Tony, are you thinking you might end up putting this into a trust in any way, or are you just going to take it yourself?
Just going to take it ourselves.
Okay, so, and just know on a side note that if you think the person wants to put it in a trust, all you have to do, see that you put per, in additional provisions, you just put per paragraph 2.2, this contract is assignable by the buyer. And you just explain to the seller that they don't have some weird thing going on. They just might want to put it in a trust. So seller, that's I didn't put the seller. This is the seller's name that owns the property. So here, what I filled in is just, this is going to be the legal description of the property that you saw, and I added the parcel number in here. So 123 County Line Road. Down here, a lot of this is boilerplate. Boilerplate is going to be what is in black. That's what the state contract shows. And then what I write into the contract is where I'm going to spend most of my time explaining it to you. So with inclusions, everything that you see when you go into a home that's actually attached to the property goes with it. So we don't have to go in and write that we're getting the mirrors and the floor coverings and things like that. It's more about having to specify what isn't attached that we want to come with it. So I'd like you to go through this with me and make sure that I remembered everything as you saw it. So we know we had the fridge, we know we had the oven, the dishwasher. Was there anything else in the kitchen that you remember as an appliance?
I want to make sure they leave the hood vent for the oven as well.
Hood vent, yeah, sure, that makes sense. Let's add that in here. And so I also know that you folks wanted to buy all the furniture in there, and it looked perfect as it was. So what I added is that all the furniture was going to come with the linens, the dining ware, electronics, and wall hangings. That way, when you come, you can just move right in and you can leave all your stuff behind in your last house. Does that sound okay, Tony?
Yeah.
Okay, so then parking and storage. This contract is a one-size-fits-all contract for the state of Colorado. So there's a lot of things in here that don't have to do with your property. So I'm going to skip right over the parking and storage. That's more if you're buying a condo. And as you know, we don't have to worry about any of that. I know that you have like the driveway for parking, but we don't have to specify any of those kind of things. So for exclusions, I did put owner's personal belongings. That's if, and I know that they really wanted to take the antler chandelier with them. They had talked about that, but the owner's personal belongings doesn't mean that they can go and take like cups and things out of the drawers. It's more if they have their ski passes and anything in like that they're allowed to take with them. Does that okay with that? I put that in there.
Yeah.
We know that they did have that one locked room and that they'll want to come and get that out. So there's no water rights because I'm gonna skip right over the parts that don't matter. That's if irrigation. We also are on central water, so we don't have to specify that. That's not going anywhere. This is just if you had a well that was serving the property. Water right review I put does not. Okay, let's talk about dates. So Tony, is there any time in the next, I have the closing set for 8 weeks from today, and that's as you had told me, I kind of got all the dates in there. Is there any time in the next 8 weeks that you are both going to Timbuktu where you're not going to have any cell or email service?
No, we should both be around the whole time.
Okay, just want to make sure. So if you change your mind and you end up going on a trip, just let me know so I can adjust the dates. So time of day deadline would be the time of day that all of our deadlines come hard. It's no longer at midnight, so we don't have to stay up and wait to see if the seller signed our offer or any of our things. So I put 8 p.m. if that is okay with you. That's kind of how I set most of my things to just know, let's just get it done by 8 so you don't have to stay up late. That okay with you?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay. Earnest money deadline. Are you going to be wiring funds or are you writing me a check today?
We'll be wiring them.
Okay. What day do you know you could get to the bank to do that?
Any weekday.
Any weekday. So
Yeah.
let's say today is Wednesday. So could I get you to go there no later than the end of the day tomorrow, or today's
Yeah.
Thursday? Okay. So if you get it there by Friday, so I'm going to set that for Tuesday so that we make sure the money has to actually be sitting in the account by that date. So I'm going to set this one for Tuesday. Thank you. And then I'll remind you tomorrow to make sure you get that done. So there's a lot of deadlines in here where it's not something you have to do. It's something that the seller has to provide to you. So one of those is the title deadline, off-record title deadline, and association documents deadline. So I set those up all for the same day. So the seller is going to be providing you with title that shows that, that you're going to have good title on the property. Off-record would be if there were old surveys, if there was anything that they remembered about the property that needed to be disclosed that might survive the day of closing. Like, let's say they gave a lease to a neighbor to come in and cut a bunch of trees down, but they'll have to tell you all about those things by the 19th. And then you have a full week to be able to go to an attorney if you want to and talk to them about it and then decide whether you want to go through with the property. Does that sound okay to you?
Yeah.
Okay. And I should back up because I used to always say this. I say there's 4 things that will let you out of or the thing with contracts in Colorado is there's going to be a whole lot of negotiation with the seller on the front end. So we got to negotiate with the seller. But once you get a property out of under contract, the seller has no right to get out of it. They got to sit back and wait for you to perform or to get out of the contract. And it's really, really easy for you to get out of a contract in Colorado. There's 4 main reasons. There's inspection. You don't like anything about the property, including, I don't like the color of the crabgrass growing in the backyard. You can get out and you can get your earnest money back. If you don't like something on the title, there's an easement or there's just something you don't like. You can't get the loan. If you don't get the loan, you are out. You can get your money back, and that's generally pretty close to closing. And there's also, if you don't like something about the association, or you can pick anything, you can say the appraisal or any of that stuff. So there's all sorts of different ways, and I will never let you forget these deadlines. I'm going to get you a copy that you can put on your fridge. I'm going to have a copy in your email, and I'm going to remind you of each of these deadlines like 3 times before they actually happen. So you never have to worry about like, what do I have to do the next day? But what I tried to do is I lined most of our deadlines up for Tuesday. So there's one day of the week that you can think, it's Monday. I bet a lot of things are going to happen tomorrow. So we have the off-record deadline. I already talked about the title deadline. Off-record, hardly anything ever comes up. We're skipping through most of these because like third-party right to purchase, that doesn't have to do with your property. Association documents will be everything to do with the HOA, that you're going to get those also by the 19th. And then again, you'll get a chance to look through it and make sure you're comfortable with the association. Property disclosure, I'm telling them they have to give it to us tomorrow. I don't like having to wait any longer because I want to know everything about the property to know if there's some reason that right away you're not comfortable and you don't want to go on before you start spending money on that inspection. Lead-based paint, it is a older condo, so we're going to make sure, older home, so we're going to make sure we get that signed by tomorrow. That's just a disclosure saying whether or not they know there's lead paint. Stop me at any time, Tony, if you have questions. But as you can see, state of Colorado, there are 23 pages, so I'll try to get through this as quick as possible. So I know you want to go to a loan. What date do you think you could get all of your paperwork into the lender?
I could get it in a week.
A week? Okay, so we'll set that for a week. Now, the first deadline you have is to get all your paperwork into the lender. I'll remind you to make sure you get that in. Let's say the deadline, I'm going to actually put it 1 extra day just in case something comes up at work and you can't get it in. The loan termination, the loan terms deadline is your all out loan deadline. So if you don't like the rate that you're being quoted, the kind of loan, how much you have to come up with down, or any of the other terms of the loan, it is an all out. You only have about 5 business days to get that done because you're going to get a truth in lending disclosure from your lender 3 days after you hand in your loan docs and all your loan stuff to them. Okay. And then I'm giving you 2 full days for you to think about it and make sure you're comfortable. Does that sound okay with you, Tony?
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay. And then the last deadline of our entire contract right before closing is going to be your loan availability. So if you don't get your loan, you get your earnest money back and you can get out. Does that sound okay with you?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to do one more date. I'm going to jump around just a little bit. Inspection deadline. I called 3 different inspectors, and once we get this property under contract, I'll go over with you who those inspectors are, the positives and negatives of each one. But I know I can get an inspector in there by the 20th. So I put that as the date of our inspection. By that date, you're going to know whether you want to object or you just want to terminate and walk away. Either one is fine. And then we have a resolution. This is the date where we go and get things decided on with the seller. You have an objection, you want certain things done. They come back and they say, we're not going to do all of them, but we'll do these 3. And then you come to a resolution and you continue with the contract, hopefully. Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the only other date I wanted to talk to you ahead of time is property insurance. This is a super easy one. I just need you to call your insurance company and make sure that the price of insurance isn't more than you were thinking, because you do have an out in the contract because of it. This came up in the state of Colorado because we had big fires years ago, and there were a whole lot of people that were not able to get insurance for their home. So we actually have a contract out in that now. So all the other deadlines, I'm going to work my way back. So we have closing set up for 5/26, which was 5 days after we can get the loan done. Does that day of the week and time, or does that work for you, doing it on 5/26?
Thursday's perfect. Yeah.
Okay. So the last deadline before that happens is going to be, like I said, the loan. So we have 5/19 is that. And a week before that happens, where you know whether you're going to get the loan, we got to get the appraisal in. We try to give as much time as possible for that appraisal, because we don't want you paying for that appraisal till we know whether you're going to get the inspection comes in okay and you actually want the property, because you might be out $600 on the appraisal. So we're gonna structure it so that we have your inspection goes first, and hopefully you haven't paid for your appraisal yet, and then we pay for your appraisal last. And that gets paid at closing. You don't have to pay it out of pocket. The inspection gets paid out of pocket. Appraisal deadline is just before the loan deadlines. And then I'm having it almost line up with a surveyor in case you decide that you told me you weren't sure if you wanted a survey or not. We can talk about that at a later time. But I did put deadlines in there so that just in case you decide to, we need to make your decision in the next couple of days. But I did put deadlines in there so that you have the right to get a survey if you'd like to. There's no water rights, there's no mineral rights on this property. So I did put not applicable for both of those. I'm putting not applicable for due diligence documents. Due diligence documents would be like, there's something about the property that you want information for. So I generally have this, I leave it not applicable unless there's a septic tank or unless they say that they already had an engineer's study. Is that okay? Unless you can think of anything that you want. Okay. So then for closing 5/26, that's the same day that you would take possession. I put acceptance deadline. They said that they were going to go over all the offers on 4/14. Let's just say that's 2 days from now. So in 2 days at 5 o'clock or at 4 o'clock, and hopefully we'll hear back by 5 o'clock on whether or not they're going to take our offer. We could ask them to push it up, but I just don't think that's realistic because they did say they wanted to look at all offers at the same time. Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
Okay. So then this is neither here nor there, but I did mark this box. So if I happen to mark up any of those dates as 4th of July or something, that it would just be pushed to the next calendar day. And I do that with all of my contracts. With price and terms, you had told me you wanted to offer $500,000 for this property, and they were asking you for $10,000 earnest money. Everything is always negotiable. Are you comfortable with the $10,000 of earnest money they're asking for?
Yeah, I think I can make that work.
And with your loan, that's not going to make you have to eat tuna fish sandwiches until closing, is it?
No.
Okay. I always, because some people don't realize like that the money actually gets cashed, they think it's like just sitting on some realtor's desk and they don't actually have to give it. Okay. So you had told me your loan is 20% down. So I worked out the numbers, and the way the contract works is you can always bring more cash to closing if you want, but you can never get a loan for more than you're asking for in the contract. So does that look okay? It comes to $350,000. So I figured that was the highest you'd be getting. And then if you decide to only get a loan for $330,000, nobody cares. Okay, so seller concession, that doesn't happen in this market. So we're going to just skip right over that. I put that you're going to give me a wire, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to go over that. So earnest money, just to go over that with you, you will have that money will be sitting in the trust account. It is, and if somebody hands you a check, you say this money will be cashed the day that you hand it to me, and it's going to sit in a trust account. It doesn't go to the seller, and it actually sometimes, but very rarely, are you not able to access it and get it back almost immediately if you terminate the contract. Almost always, the seller just lets you out of the contract because you have a right to terminate. They release your earnest money. Once in a while, we get into a dispute where they try to hold on to it for a short amount of time, but that's in all my years, it's only happened once or twice. That's how I put it. I always put it on all my years of my office. Since some of you are new, you say all my years in my office, that happens very infrequently, even with the amount of sales we do. So that kind of puts them at a better comfort level. So, okay. So this outlines what happens if the seller decides not to give you your earnest money back, and how quickly they are supposed to be giving back to you if you decide to terminate. And the fact that everything has to be good funds. Okay, let's talk about available funds. It said there that you would have cash at closing of $150,000 that you're bringing to closing. Right now, sitting in your bank account, do you have $150,000 that is ready to be transferred, or does something have to happen in order for you to get that money?
I've got it all ready to go.
Okay, and is it sitting in a checking account, or is it tied up in any sort of investment?
It is in a savings account.
Perfect. Okay, I'm going to mark that you do have it. It doesn't make your offer any less strong if you don't have the money. It's just something that we want to explain to the listing agent if you don't. So I did mark conventional loan. In no way are you getting like a HELOC, or are you a vet, or is there any other kind of loan you're looking at?
Nope.
Okay, so let's skip all this. This is all if you were assuming the loan. New application, this just outlines what you have to do in terms of the contract about the loan. And if you can't like I said, it's 23 pages. If you can't sleep tonight and you want to pull this out and read all the fine print, I'm happy to let you do that. And if you have questions, please stop me. But this just goes into what your rights are during the contract. Are you good on the loan?
Mhm.
Okay. So appraisal, this also goes into what you're doing on the appraisal. We're going to have an appraisal of the house. And what generally happens is you're going to get an appraisal. And if it doesn't appraise, you either get out of the contract because you don't want the house because it appraised too low. You can ask the seller to come down on their price to match the appraised price. You could get a new appraisal done if the seller allows you the time to do it, or you could split the difference. I've seen everything happen in the contracts, but that gives you a better feel for, yes, you had me go through the comps with you and you feel comfortable with the amount you're asking, but now you're getting an expert during the process to make sure that the house is worth what you're willing to finance and pay. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so that outlines what all your rights are under that. And we're going to skip over the FHA and VA. Oh my God, I'm really running out of time. Jeff Follis is going to have to wait. Okay, lender property requirements. This has to do with if your lender requires you to do something. So let's say it appraises, but the lender comes back and says they have to fix the gutter. So we'll get into that. It's very rare that that happens. This house is in really good condition, so I doubt that's going to come up. It is normal and customary in our area for the buyers to pay all the costs of their loan. So I did mark that the appraisal would be on you. Is that okay?
Mhm.
Okay, so owners association, this is in big bold print. And the reason that is you actually should read this part. And it says that after closing, Tony, you cannot stick up a red flag on your property or a pink flamingo and say, I do not want to be part of the HOA. If you're buying into a subdivision, they are going to have rules. They're going to have fees that you have to pay and you have to be part of it. There's no way you can kind of stand aside. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay. So these are all the kinds of association documents that you have the right to look at if they exist in the subdivision, everything from meetings to minutes. I'm going to have you try to talk to one of the other owners. I'm going to have you talk to somebody on the board of the HOA. I'm going to have us get all the financials so that you can take it to an attorney if you choose to and have them advise you whether you should be part of this community or not. There's all different kind of HOAs, and we're going to make sure we protect your rights and have you really know what this subdivision is like. So this just outlines the conditional on buyer's review that you have the right to terminate if you don't like anything about the subdivision. And then title insurance company. It is normal and customary for the seller to choose the title company in our area. OEC is an extra form of title insurance. It gives you the highest form of title insurance that you can get. It insures for things that other title insurance doesn't cover. So what that is parties in possession. I mean, that would just be if there was a big ranch and somebody was living out on it, but unrecorded easements, you'd actually get insurance for that. Survey matters. If there was a survey that came up and it was different than a survey that's already been done. Mechanics liens, the gap period between closing and any unpaid taxes. So we are asking for this kind of insurance. It might require that there is a survey done on the property, but we are asking the seller to pay for that. So I'm making this a seller cost. And I just want you to know that you'll be covered if the title company is good if the title company is good with giving you the title insurance, then you should feel comfort with your title, that you have good title. God, I'm rusty. Okay, so this all goes into record title. The next one is off record title. It's about all the things that might be off record, like I said, with leases or kind of handshake deals with the neighbors, those sort of things. So you do have a right to find those things out. Also, old surveys that might be on file. They do have to give those to you. They can't just keep them from you. Special taxing districts. This is another one. When you get that's in bold because it's important that you can't stick up a red flag after closing because you happen to be in a special taxing district and you don't want to be. In the state of Colorado, there are places that have a higher tax than the neighbor, and that taxing district was voted in and it was decided on in order to raise money that otherwise could have been done, say, through an HOA. So you might have better sidewalks in one section of a neighborhood. You might have better roads in a section of the neighborhood, but it's because they raise their money through taxing and it pays for things around their area. So it's important for you to look at your tax statement. You're going to get that with your title, and then you can review it and make sure that you're comfortable with the taxing districts that are there. Does that sound okay to you?
Yeah.
we're making the seller pay for that, and that is a normal and customary thing. You have a right to object. Okay, oil and gas. Oil and gas, another one that is real important in Colorado. You do not own the mineral rights under your property. Hardly anyone ever does. Oil and gas development is around the county, and in your specific area, we have never had it before, but it doesn't mean that it might not be a concern to you. So I'm letting you know when we get under contract, I'm going to give you 3 names. It's going to be 3 different people that you can talk to and get a comfort level of what the laws are in the state of Colorado, as they do with oil and gas development. So you can decide whether you're comfortable with that or not. Okay. So I'm not, or let's just say I'm not giving you a right to terminate. Yeah, because there's no mineral rights, so we're not going to give you a right to terminate. Okay, then usually I'd be going through the survey with you. There's different kinds of surveys. I think it's really important that you get a survey on the property. I always think so. You want to make sure you know exactly where those boundaries are. I know there's a fence, but it might not be accurately on the property line. So what I did, and I know, Tony, we kind of talked about this and you said you weren't sure if you really thought it necessary. If it's okay with you, I'd like to put this language in there that you have a right to get a survey if you choose to. And then there are deadlines in the contract. And then if you decide to get one or not, you have the right to do it and nobody's going to force you to do anything you don't want to do. Is that okay, Tony?
Yeah, sounds
okay.
smart.
I'd like to leave it in the contract though. Okay, and it would be a buyer cost, and that's normal and customary. If you do to get a survey, I'm saying that you have to get your attorney a copy of it to make sure that they're comfortable with it too. Okay, property disclosure. Everything negative that the seller knows about the property that they're actually aware of, they do have to disclose to you, and then you have a right to object to it. So this will go through all the different kinds. This is a very important paragraph to read. It includes everything that you might want to get inspected on the property. And we can go over that at a later time when we're getting closer to your inspection to make sure you're getting all the kind of contractors or anyone out to the property that you want to. And then you have a right, there's 3 things that are different things that can happen during the inspection period. You decide you don't want a house and you want to bail. You decide you want to ask the seller to do some things. It's up to you and the seller getting together and trying to decide, is it worth you going through the contract, or would you like to bail and you just get your money back because it's not something that you signed up for? Does that all make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Damage. Everything is in the Colorado contract. This is what happens if your inspector breaks something in the house, whose responsibility is for it. Insurability. You do have a right to check into your insurance. Like I said, it's not a big deal, but you do want to make some calls. Due diligence, we're gonna skip this because we didn't mark due diligence documents. These 2 paragraphs just say if the seller happens to have encumbered inclusions, that you're not taking those over, or leased items. We're not asking for any documents there. Okay, let's see. This just marks that we're getting a property disclosure from them and there is no well. Carbon monoxide alarms have to be included with the contract. We even have methamphetamine disclosure in here. If they know about meth, whether they have to disclose it or not. So it's all in the contract. You can feel like you're covered. This has to do just with closing and closing instructions. You don't have to really worry about that. We're just saying on the day of closing, it's going to be by buyer and seller by mutual agreement. The kind of deed, so there's 2 kinds of deeds that are common in Colorado or in our area. There's special warranty deed, general warranty deed. General warranty deed will insure the property for every single person that's ever owned the property back, and the seller is responsible to insure you for all the way back through the beginning of that property. Special warranty deed just will insure you for the time period that seller owned the home. So times have kind of changed over the last few years, and it's very common for us to see special warranty deed now. I did not check general warranty deed because I think that it would make our offer really stick out. But if that was a concern to you, we can get extra insurance that protects you to give you a better coverage under that if you're worried about it for any reason. Does that make sense to you? Okay. So closing fees. Here's how I work it. I have, there's a whole lot of little check marks here, and it all has to do with what's going on with the HOA and whether there are fees that have to be transferred at closing. And I know this is the easy part to just glaze over because there's so many check marks here. But what I'm basically saying, other than the closing fee, this is the fee that is for you to have your closing at the title company. That is normal and customary that you will pay all your loan fees and then you split the cost of the closing fee here, okay? But for all these other fees, I'm just saying it's not our problem to know what these fees are going to cost. Let's make the seller pay for them all. And then when you sell the property, then you'll know what the HOA would charge for all the little transfers. Does that make sense? I'm not putting it on you because I don't want to nickel and dime you and then you don't know what your costs are going to be at closing. Is that okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, we don't have a water transfer fee, utility transfer fee. I'm saying if there was one, that would be you. FERPTA has to do with if the seller was a foreign, lived in England for most of the year. There's a law that says you're supposed to somehow know that. I did not check that box. Taxes, we're going to get a proration at closing based on the most recent mill levy and most recent assessment. Now that is the best way to get the proration done at closing. We don't have anything here. We're going to mark no special assessments to make sure the seller tells us if there's any sort of special assessment going on at the HOA. Possession, how much is it? And then you go over that with the buyer. How much, if your seller didn't move out and they wanted to close, but then they didn't get out on the day of closing, how much would it cost you guys to get a hotel and get the moving van an extra day and all those things? And so you have that conversation with them and that's the amount you put in there. And then the rest of this, I kind of make fun of, not make fun of, but make light of this part of the contract. I'm like, this whole page is about what happens if the house burns down before closing. I hate to say it, but like everything is in the contract that could possibly, you can tell attorneys wrote this. This happens to do if something happens to the house before closing, whose fault is it and what has to happen? What if the house is condemned before closing? That's in here. And it does allow you a walkthrough and verification that the house is what you were expecting right before you close. You have the right to do a walkthrough. So again, I do recommend you have legal and tax counsels. Tony, do you have an attorney that you'd like to review this before you go ahead and sign it?
No, I don't think that's necessary.
Okay. So lastly, I do want to talk about if you were in default, so liquidated damages. If you decide the day of closing that you just decided not to buy the house, the worst they could do is come after you and keep your earnest money, okay? So you're not forced to go through with it. Yes, there's a lot of outs in the contract, but you're also protected that the earnest money is the most that you would ever be out. The seller does have to perform and does have to sell you the house. Mediation, if you were to get really screaming mad at the seller and they get screaming mad at you, you're both agreeing, if you sign this, that you would go to mediation before you go ahead and sue anybody. This goes into if there happened to be an earnest money dispute. I don't see that very often. And then termination, right to terminate, and what that looks like. Okay, that's about it. So I have a few additional provisions. We can go over the cleaning and what you would like cleaned in the house and that kind of thing, and then get them to sign it. Any questions? I have the speaker outside and I'm like, oh my God, I got to get through this. So I ran through that quickly.
All right. In this kind of market, it feels a little bit nutty, the suggestion of legal counsel before you sign. So would you?
I've never had somebody do it. And even in a
well, I mean, it sounds kind of dumb coming out of your mouth, being like, do you want to take this to a lawyer tomorrow? But we're trying to get it in right now.
I think that I would bring it up during the time of the buyer consultation.
Yeah, just like in advance,
you're saying
want to take it, just take the template to them then.
If you want to go to an attorney about your rights about this contract, I will give you a blank contract and go ahead and talk to an attorney. And beside that, it would be, we're going to be talking about how high over asking price you want to go. So let's have that conversation. At the same time, we're talking about an attorney. Then you get to actually write the contract. You got to sign it and get it in. You have no time to do it, but you should mention it. And you might even circle it on the page and say, this is what we talked about before, just so you know, by the state of Colorado, I am told I am supposed to tell you that if you wanted to get this to an attorney, the time is not after you sign it. And that's it. And then you move on.
Okay.
Antonio, good to see you. Anybody else have anything that they want to ask?